Good morning, everyone. Brian Walker here. Thank you for joining. Happy New Year. We're, I guess, 7 days into 2021. Feels a lot like 2020 so far. I'm sure we're all hoping. Let me turn down the music. Um, Hoping that 2021 brings a very fresh chapter for all of us. I know some of you are in the UK and under lockdown 3.0 or whatever you're calling it. I know a number of you are probably in parts of the United States that are also dealing with pretty significant resurgence of the virus. I'm a little bleary eyed because I stayed up very late last night, kind of watching history unfold yesterday in the United States. Very interesting times, to say the least. So it feels like we're not really turning the page on the new year fully, but obviously the calendar shows us it's January 7th. Um, Again, thank you for joining us here today. Really appreciate you taking some time. Here we will be focusing on some December results. We're looking at some post-holiday, kind of where did the sort of the big picture end up post-holiday. We'll also be sharing with you some outlook for 2021, some things to be thinking about and looking out for in the new year. This morning, I'm joined by a new co-host in the new year. I want to welcome Ian Burgers to the Commerce Pulse show. Ian is based in our Amsterdam office, although, of course, we're also still largely working remote here at Bloomreach across the globe. Ian will join us a little later to talk about search terms, and I might also ask Ian for some of his perspective on what's happening in the UK and Europe as well. So pleased to have Ian join us here today. And of course, Christine will be back. She'll be back to join us as a special guest in future episodes. So she's still very much focused on making our customers successful, and we'll want to get her insights as we move forward as well. As always, want to just touch on about the data. What we're going to share with you here today is an aggregation of data from across the Bloomreach customers. Majority of our customers, of course, are in the US and North America, UK, and Europe. So we'll be looking at those different regions as we progress. And of course, we have customers across a wide variety of different retail and B2B segments, which we can aggregate to give you a flavor for how those different segments performed in the holiday and December timeframes, and then of course moving forward. We'll need to update that second bullet. You know, we last time we sort of calculated we were powering over 200 billion in annual sales, the equivalent of 25% of retail e-commerce in the U.S. and the UK. After 2020, we'll need to update that number. It's going to be quite a bit higher than 200 billion, considering all the growth that so many of our customers experienced. And of course, we're very honored and pleased to be able to be such an important part of so many great businesses and brands' digital commerce strategy, which of course in 2020 was of course more important than ever to our clients and their customers. Let's go ahead and move on here and talk a little bit about our headlines. We'll go ahead and click through these. No question, the virus has continued to have a profound impact on results. But again, as we shared the last Commerce Pulse call, kind of looking at the Cyber 5 and November results, we see kind of a tale of two markets with some very different results. North America holiday sales overall remained very strong. We'll get into those numbers, but it was essentially a plus 40% performance year over year during the holiday period. But we did see a weakening in December, which we'll get into a little later, that just kind of a deceleration in the growth rate in December. And one of the biggest reasons for that in North America was a drop in conversion rates, which we see as an indication of products being out of stock, that customers were looking for. That's also a result of some supply chain management and lower inventory levels that many businesses came into the holiday with due to a response to COVID. UK and European holiday results were modest, again, impacted by the weakness in demand from a lot of different conditions. I think we can't ignore the fact that the virus spikes in the UK with the new variation that was discovered in the UK. Also, uncertainty around Brexit negotiations in December, which I think everyone's pleased to see have somewhat resolved toward the end of December. But during the holiday period, were very much on everyone's minds. And certainly in the UK and Europe, kind of a different kind of level of consumer confidence that really kind of derived from all these different factors, but the virus probably being the main one. And then we saw that certainly continued in December. Let's go ahead and build these out. Another key factor I think that impacted December results was early holiday shopping, as well as I mentioned, inventory availability, supply chain, and logistics concerns, meaning shipping and delivery timeframes. All of that put an emphasis on October and November. And I think by the time we got to December, consumers, many of whom had already completed their shopping, and then certainly for retailers and brands, inventories began to be lean. I mean, the positive to that is, of course, there will be less, hopefully, clearance activity necessary to clean out some of that inventory in 2021, although that will have an impact on sales performance potentially in January. But of course, there will be returns and other things to work through as well. But nonetheless, those are certainly factors. And as I mentioned, consumer sentiment was certainly impacted dramatically, and we'll share a little bit about that as we move forward. In terms of the segment performance, home DIY and grocery segments continue to be very strong, and interesting to see that luxury did kind of have a late year rebound. However, home furnishings, apparel, general merch, and B2B all saw kind of a trailing off in December, which we'll get into some of that as we move forward. So that's very interesting to see. In terms of top search terms, it's very interesting to see that COVID essentials continued among the top searches. Of course, that combined with gift and seasonal holiday-related search terms. But it is interesting to continue to see that masks and disinfectant products and toilet paper and so forth continue to be absolutely leading in many respects the top search terms across the Bloomreach customer base. And I'd say the outlook for 2021 digital commerce does come into focus. I'll cover that at the end of the call. We'll go into some detail about that, so we'll kind of pause on that point, but hopefully you'll find that interesting. So in terms of the holiday 2020 results, it's remained fairly consistent with where we saw things at the end of November in the Cyber 5. We ended up at plus 40% year-over-year sales increase in North America. That's actually a little overperformance relative to the overall 2020 results, for the year. So kind of a strong, acceleration, if you will, in online shopping and purchasing toward the end of the year with a very strong result for North America. But as I said, much more modest in terms of the UK and European market. And that's, of course, a pretty stark difference. And of course, in the UK and Europe, even though many consumers live in dense urban areas and, certainly are used to shopping locally in many cases, and e-commerce may not have had the same level of penetration heading in. Of course, with the lockdowns and shutdowns, earlier in the year, we saw an acceleration in digital commerce that was commensurate in many ways with North America. Toward the end of the year, we started to see that change. And certainly with the holiday performance at only up plus 9%, which in a normal year might seem pretty good, considering all of the shutdowns and the impact of COVID. I would consider that to be pretty disappointing, to be perfectly honest. And I think we have to sort of double click into why that is the case. And I definitely think we have to look at consumer sentiment. And it's not just even the attitudes about the economic situation and the pretty dramatic difference. Of course, this data is again from McKinsey. This, of course, took place in the middle of November, but we don't have anything more recent than that that looks across these different markets. But I think this is probably pretty accurate. But you see that 41% of American consumers were optimistic, when about their home economy and their economic kind of prospects, and only 13% of Americans were quote unquote pessimistic about the economic situation. And that really is a pretty dramatic contrast to the UK. Germany, maybe not so dramatically, but certainly other markets key markets in Europe, such as Spain, Italy, and France, similar or worse than the UK. And I think what's not just about sort of this attitude about consumer confidence and the strength of the economy and what that might mean for them and their families personally, but it's also then how you behave as a result of that. And Ian, I know you're on the line. Welcome, by the way, to the Commerce Pulse call. I'm curious, one of the things that I think is quite different about an American consumer attitude and those of a Northern European or a UK consumer is this sort of natural conservatism that takes hold with a consumer in those markets, which is largely based on the post-war period and is sort of culturally, I think, in place in those markets. Could you share a point of view on that?
Yeah, I think you said it correctly, Brian. I think it's just a bit of a difference culturally between the US and Europe. Especially with the resurgence of the virus in December, leading up to the end of the year, I think there was a lot of uncertainty in Europe. And I think if you compare the US to the EU, I think it's fair to say that in times like that, where there's high uncertainty, people tend to be a bit more conservative. And, we see that in spending and, we rather save a bit more than, spend that money. And I think that's what we see in this data here.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't necessarily want to suggest that American consumers are loose with their money, but I think that and it's certainly a case that in the U.S. And other markets, there is sort of a tale of two different kinds of experiences related to COVID, depending on your occupation, your ability to work remote, the industry that you're participating in. But obviously, if you're in the service economy, you've been impacted much more significantly than if you're in others. So nonetheless, in the macro, the American consumer remained quite bullish and optimistic that things are going to remain healthy and strong. That might be in some ways related to the stock market, which of course is not just American money fueling the American market, but it certainly creates a perspective. And certainly people might be looking to some of their savings accounts that are tied to the market, such as their 401ks and so forth, and feeling like they're still in pretty good shape. So nonetheless, this I think is a key part of the story as to why the North American market and the European and UK markets performed so differently during that time. I do want to just quickly mention, we do have a lot more data available in our peak holiday 2020 report. That does not necessarily cover as much of the December data that we'll get to next, but I think it is useful. So if you don't have it, I think you should grab it. It might help you kind of benchmark a little bit with your organization and your performance during that time frame and give you some perspective on what happened across the Bloomreach customer base. Let's go ahead and move into a look at December. You can see we still have the holiday lights up. I know at my house, I still also have my holiday lights up. My wife doesn't want me to take them down, saying we need as much cheer as we can get, especially in these short winter days up here in the Northwest. Looking at North American e-commerce in December, I think, as I mentioned, we have to see that there was a pretty significant slowing in December sales, pointing to the year-over-year column, comparing December 2020 to December 2019. Overall sales only went up 15.36% year over year. That's a pretty dramatic shift from where we had been seeing it. And as we just talked about, holiday overall for North America was up 40%. You can also see, though, that there was a big disconnect between the amount of traffic, which was up 55% year over year, and the sales results. And the biggest explanation for that is, of course, the dip in conversion rate at the very bottom there. You can also see the difference between November 2020 and December 2020, with sales down 20%. Obviously, December, there's a couple factors here. One is in 2019, Cyber Monday fell in December. That was not the case in 2020. That's one factor. It's also true that, holiday shopping was pushed earlier. There was less last minute. And of course, we're talking about online, even though in-store pickup and other ways of fulfilling, we're talking about a relatively short portion of the holiday shopping period being in December, relatively speaking, but still pretty dramatic story. And I think that tailing off of the December sales year over year is really the story there, even though that Cyber Monday might have had some impact. I think the last point here is just to say, if you think about the overall year-to-date performance in North America, in aggregate, Bloomreach customer base up 35.86% year over year, year-to-date sales. That would include the roughly 2 months at the beginning of the year pre-pandemic impact, but certainly really tells the story of how the pandemic and all of the carry-on impacts impacted digital commerce performance in North America. Looking at the UK and EU, as I mentioned, much more modest growth. We've already talked about the consumer confidence thing at length. Year over year, December 2020 versus December 2019, overall sales were up only 9.49%, so slightly better than the overall holiday number. But you can also see there that average order size and conversion rate both fell as well year over year in the UK and European markets. And you can also see that there was a tailing off effect month over month. And you can see that year to date, European and UK customers were only up 14.43% in that year to date column on the far right. And I think that again just shows that there's a pretty different story on how the consumer responded to all of this, their spending habits, and the benefits, in a sense, that were accrued through the digital channels. So I think the overall economic activity and consumer spending really had a much deeper impact in those markets. And of course, the virus has played out in a very sort of different way mid-year between the North American and UK markets as well, where there was a period of time in the summer where things were kind of getting back to normal, more so in Europe and the UK than here in North America, in my opinion. And then of course the unfortunate resurgence of the virus. But nonetheless, pretty interesting to see the difference between the performance in North America and the performance in the UK and Europe. Let's move into some of the segment data. In terms of looking at home furnishings, we've mentioned that this is one of the biggest stories of 2020. obviously with everyone working from home and educating kids at home, and unfortunately, I've been having quite a few conversations with parents and friends of mine and customers and employees who are dealing with this absolutely now again. But nonetheless, we can see that again, the year over year sales increase was only 20.12% in December. That's again, a pretty different, much lower increase than what we've seen in previous months. The year to date overall sales number for this home furnishing segment was actually 55.95%, which is pretty incredible. But again, you have to look at the traffic and the conversion rate to really get the story of what's happening in this segment. And I believe that this is largely due to high demand products not being available, most likely due to inventory and supply chain impacts. To have that level of traffic, that dramatic a drop in conversion rate, that is really very interesting to see. And I think it's really related to these high demand categories not being able to be replenished and restocked and available to customers, that they were frankly looking for. And I think that for many retailers and brands, the changes they made to their orders from their suppliers and how much inventory they were planning to carry. The good news is they probably exhausted a lot of that inventory, and so they're probably leaving the year very clean, which is good news. But there was probably some business left on the table as a result of that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next segment, and that would be apparel. And again, we see that the December numbers really tailed off, only up 6.86% year over year. Pretty dramatic drop month over month. But again, thinking about the holiday shopping and the shorter portion of that's in December. But again, you see the conversion rate impact there, and the difference between the traffic and sales increases really playing out. And again, I think inventory and shipping concerns were probably an issue here. And certainly in apparel and footwear, sizing is a key thing. And I can just say anecdotally that, finding the right size, especially mainstream sizes, right in the bell curve, were hard to find. Toward the end of the holiday shopping period. So I guess I'm admitting I was a little bit late, which is ironic considering I've been talking about holiday shopping for so long. But yes, I was shopping a little bit late. Everyone was happy with their gifts, so don't worry. All right, let's move on to the next segment. Luxury e-commerce. I think what's interesting here is that relative to the other categories, luxury actually had a pretty positive rebound from where they were earlier in the year. And again, you can see the year-to-date numbers. Year-to-date, the segment was only up 12%, so much lower than other segments. And yet, year-over-year in December, up 20.84%. So luxury actually had a little bit of an improvement in terms of results in December. But here we see kind of the flip side. We see conversion rate dramatically improving and average order size slipping a bit, which shows that maybe luxury brands and retailers, offering more discounting, but also potentially their inventory mix changed. The conversion rate here is very healthy, up 19.61% year over year. That's a pretty healthy number, and you can actually see that month over month, this segment actually improved December 2020 versus November 2020. That might be related to some promotional activity as well, but that's a really interesting to see that this category actually had a little bit of a rebound. But you can see that there were still products that people were searching for they couldn't find. You can see that in the relatively modest search sales number. So interesting to see the change in dynamic with luxury toward the very end of the year. We're going to close out our segment looking at segments with grocery, which of course has been a major story all year and remains really consistent in December. with this segment up 68.25%, which is very much right in alignment with its year-to-date number, and similarly the quarter-over-quarter number. So we see that there's a kind of a new normal, if you will. Again, we've been talking about this for a number of months, but it seems that digital commerce in grocery has really kind of leveled out, and it doesn't seem to be changing. Obviously, the pandemic resurgence is driving some of that, but these are behaviors now that I think have really established themselves in many consumers' lives, using online ordering in grocery. And of course, we see that the dynamic around the grocery sort of fulfillment and e-commerce solutions market is evolving quickly as well, kind of as a result of that. Also, of course, interesting to see the change in average order size and conversion rate year over year. And I think, again, that's because you don't have the same ordering minimums you used to have, and certainly conversion rates are much higher because people are coming in with a very targeted list, and you can see that with the search results in traffic and sales as well. So, at any rate, that kind of, we've got other segment data that you're going to be able to get through our site and the blog and so forth. So I would encourage you, if there's other information that you're looking for, to reach out to us or check that to get some additional segment data if we didn't cover what you're looking for there. With that, I want to invite Ian in to cover off on kind of what we saw in search.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the search term data for the holiday season. So on the right, we see all the top search terms. And in the first column, we see December 2020 top search terms. In the middle, we can compare it to the year before. So the December 2019 top search terms. And in the very column on the right, it's compared to the month prior. So that's November 2020. And we can see some very interesting trends here. So marked in green are the seasonal items, and we can see that they're still very dominant in the top search terms in December, which is obvious as people buy seasonal items for the holiday season. Then another interesting trend that keeps coming back every month is the COVID essentials, which are marked in orange, and there's still making a strong appearance in December 2020. Some of that might be gift giving. I can assume that a nice and trendy mask might be a nice gift to give or to receive.
I want to know how many people got Lysol in their stocking.
Yeah, I wonder that as well. Paper towels are not the most trendy gift to give. But we see the COVID essentials definitely prominent here. If we compare the search terms of this year to the ones of last year, one obvious trend is that we see a lot of outdoor related searches in 2019, things like outerwear, shoes, boots, and jeans. Those items are a bit less popular in 2020 as we stay home a bit more. You might like to be a bit more comfortable in some pajamas and some socks and some joggers in 2020. So we see a difference. 2019 preparing for outdoors, 2020 more preparing for some lounge time. Then the last interesting trend to note is, the huge popularity of the PlayStation 5, which is the second most popular search term in December 2020. I know that I was hoping to treat myself to a PlayStation 5 over the holidays, but they were sold out everywhere, which makes sense because we can see here that a lot of people were searching for the PlayStation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ian. Really appreciate it. Always interesting to look at what people are searching for. So we're going to wrap up here this morning with kind of a 2021 outlook. I mentioned that I think things are starting to become a little bit more clear. I think the first major point here is, look, the move to digital habits are here to stay. And while growth may moderate, it's going to continue to grow in 2021. I've seen forecasts from people like eMarketer looking at about a 16% annual growth rate in 2021. I'm not sure if that's the right number, but it's a data point. I think we'll be seeing other forecasts coming out here very soon from some of the other research firms and others. It wouldn't surprise me if they were in that kind of ballpark. So the point is, even though we're hopeful that we'll reach herd immunity in either through vaccines or whatnot in the spring, and hopefully we start returning to a more free lifestyle where we can go out to dinner and we can go shopping and we can go to school and we can go to the office. The likelihood is that, given the amount of time that COVID has had this dramatic impact on people's lives and how they've adopted these digital channels, from everything from grocery to their other needs and wants, and in categories like home improvement, and how retailers have adapted and brands have adapted to leverage their stores and other ways of fulfillment, we're going to see this growth continue. I think it's just really important to not, be expecting that things are going to go back to a pre-pandemic 2019 level or customer behaviors. We're going to continue to see this grow and develop, and in some segments, perhaps even more dramatically than others. Let's go ahead and move on to the next bullet. Direct-to-consumer channels, commerce and marketing, of course, as a result of that, are now more critical than ever, and that's true for every business. And we see this accelerating the transformation of traditional brand, retailer, and B2B relationships as well. Certainly for brands, this is now really an imperative to focus on a direct-to-consumer relationship for their brand, and really, work on a more efficient, in a sense, marketing strategy. They can reap greater margins, they have more control over demand, they get better customer and product sell-through intelligence. There's a lot of benefits that accrue, and 2020 was this major inflection point and sort of transformation of that. Meanwhile, for retailers, this will continue to also, in a sense, push them toward more private label, and also thinking about marketplace models and other ways to think about adapting their business, but nonetheless, a focus on these digital channels as they need to close stores that are no longer performing, probably haven't for a number of years been profitable. And we see this ongoing evolution and transformation really accelerated, of course, dramatically in 2020. And in B2B, again, a direct-to-customer relationship becoming more and more critical for manufacturers, but certainly for distributors leveraging these digital channels and starting to erode some of the traditional go-to-market motions and trade relationships. And so that's a pretty meaningful evolution. The next bullet, certainly related to that is a renewed focus on customer marketing, meaning, retention of the customers that you acquired in 2020, getting more and more effective performance through your existing customers. Less focus on acquisition, more focus on marketing to your known and existing customers, leveraging first-party data, utilizing segmentation and personalization to drive a better commerce experience, also drive better performing, more efficient marketing results as well. And of course, we have this also issue around the elimination of third-party cookies and this move toward first-party data. And so that renewed focus, maybe it's not even renewed. Maybe it's like a doubled down focus on customer marketing, segmentation, and personalization. Absolutely true for many brands who don't have necessarily a robust competency in those areas, but really for every business, this has got to be a major emphasis in 2021. Next bullet. We see that participation in marketplaces as a part of your digital commerce strategy is starting to degrade. The commoditization of brands within those marketplaces, like Amazon, for example, or like a Walmart, or like an Alibaba, in a sense, does not really reinforce your long-term differentiation and value proposition. So you can see more and more retailers and brands starting to think very carefully about participation in those marketplaces, let alone the profit impact that they will see by sharing a pretty healthy amount of margin with the marketplace provider. At the same time, interest in launching marketplaces is likely to increase again in 2021. Retailers and B2B companies in particular are looking at this as a way to efficiently add product categories and products. We don't necessarily, I think, as customers, need an infinite number of marketplaces to find these products, or to have these off-brand, offshore suppliers participating with like kind of pseudo brands and all these kind of crazy things that are happening. But nonetheless, I think we'll see this trend amplify. So really, it's a tale of two impacts relative to marketplaces. We will see physical stores and locations continue to adapt as fulfillment locations and also, in a sense, showrooms. So this convergence of digital and physical will continue, but the role of that physical store in 2020 as a place to just go pick up curbside or pick up in store, that's going to continue to be a key behavior across a wide variety of different segments. And we've seen the dramatic impact it's had in some, like home improvement or grocery, that before, the digital channels were not particularly effective. That totally transformed, in part because of how the physical store was used as a part of that overall customer journey and experience. And then, I think another key point here is that we see that 2021 is the year for B2B e-commerce to really come into its own. Certainly for many B2B companies, whether they were distributors or manufacturers, there was still a sense that e-commerce was important, but maybe not the most important. And 2020 really demonstrated that that's not true, and that if anything, their customers want to use these digital self-service channels primarily, and that investing in these channels is critical for business continuity purposes and for all the other benefits that come from a more efficient way of reaching customers in the way they want to engage. And then just one more final point. We really do believe that the commerce experiences are now becoming the differentiator for all businesses. And that means, exceptional product discovery, engaging, inspiring experiences that work, right? And that usability and streamlined experiences are critical. And of course, it connects to other business processes for sure, like service and fulfillment. But this is now how every business really needs to think. And these are not just, these are primarily now digital commerce experiences. We've also moved from an era of omni-channel to really digital first. So other channels are still important, but when we say commerce experiences, that's really a digital first strategy that might utilize some of these other channels as a key part of that customer journey. And that is now the differentiator for all businesses to really need to think about and focus on. And that I think will play out in 2021. So hopefully that gives you a sense for some of the things we see happening in 2021. I would like to point to a great blog post from Raj, our CEO here at Bloomreach. He put up not long ago, looking at key predictions for the retail market and commerce in general. If you're looking for more on 2021, I would encourage you to check out Raj's blog post for sure. And with that, I think we are wrapped up. A little long today. We had a lot to get through. Really appreciate your time and joining us here this morning, or if you're on demand, joining us on demand as well. I know we get a lot of people viewing these on demand as well. With that, please do reach out to us if you have follow-on questions or there's anything you think we might be able to help you with. If you're looking for particular segment data or just want a perspective on something, we always enjoy engaging on that. We will be conducting these. Our plan is to continue to conduct these monthly. So I think you'll see something pop up in early February. I know we really enjoy these as well, and it's great to be able to share with you what's happening. in February, in March, we're going to start also seeing some annualization of the COVID impact on the businesses. So it's going to be very interesting for us to now sort of turn the clock over and start looking at what is that follow-on impact now that we've kind of, unfortunately, it's crazy to think about, almost gone through a whole year of this. And we'll start to see that play out in our commerce reporting, some of the numbers that we're able to share. So with that, I want to thank you very much. Appreciate again your time. Let's get the music going. By the way, this music, this is the Avalanche's new record. They decided to play something new today. Oh, my stereo went off. Let me turn that back on. Decided to play something new today. If you're looking for some new music, I would encourage you. It's a really recent release. I think only a few weeks old. Band's called the Avalanches. It's a good record. This is a particularly upbeat song. They may not be all quite so upbeat, but I hope you can enjoy it. With that, you take care. Happy New Year. Talk to you all soon.